So hello and welcome to Let's Talk SEO. Entities and Entity SEO is a big part of your on-page strategy, but it's also going to be part of your off-page strategy moving forward. Now, I'm not going to talk about the off-page strategy in today's video, but I'm going to talk about the on-page strategy and what I've learned from looking at the algorithm. And also some of my own experience based off split testing different types of on-page optimization and entities and adding entities to various parts of a page and including the schema. Now, in this video, we will dive into exactly how entities work, how Google is identifying entities on a page, how Google is scoring those entities, and how that works into optimizing your pages best for ranking. Now, this is not industry dependent. This is not whether you're doing national SEO or you're doing local SEO or you're doing international SEO. This applies to all types of SEO. And not only will I run through what I've discovered looking at the algorithm leaks, but also a lot from my own experience of split testing this. So this is going to be a really important video for anyone who wants to correctly optimize their on-page. Now, I understand that there's a lot more to optimizing your on-page, but consider this as being 70% of what you should be doing to optimize your on-page, regardless of your industry. All right, so now that we've established what this video is about, let's zoom in. Entity SEO has been around for a really long time. SEOs have always understood that there is a role of entities when it comes to SEO. At least it's been around 10 years from when I've been aware of the use of Entity SEO, and I was made aware of this by the late Bill Salvisky, who talked extensively about Entity SEO. And for anyone who wants to get into Entity SEO, wants to get into like on-page optimization, understand the inner workings or the behind the scenes of any type of Google search, you want to take a look at and read SEO by the Sea. Now, entities. A list of entities detected on a document.txt. Entity relations, placeholder.relationship among documents.entities. Now, there are two APIs that I've found in the API leak that have to do with entities. The first API, as you can see here, detects entities in a document. Now, I'll get into how Google does this detection or runs this detection, but for now, suffice to say that Google starts by detecting a list of entities in your document, which can be your web page, which can be even a PDF file, depending on what you've published. And then what Google does, it starts building relationship between the entities on your page, because Google is trying to make sense of the entities that are on the page. And so that's where the Entity Relations API comes in. So the step number one is Google detects the entities. Google identifies a relationship between these entities, and as you can see here, there's a document. Google is identifying whether this document has to do with local entities or if it has to do with external entities. These are local entities over here. These are external entities, which can be your country, your state, which can also be something that's related to your subject. These are all considered external entities. All right, so any document or query can have multiple entities, and each mentioned is different in different places. This message covers a single mention, which can be explicit or implicit. Explicit mentions show the exact spot in the document, while implicit mentions may not. Next, available tag number 40. Now, what this means is when you're optimizing a document, there are two things that are important, and this is something we found through testing. Is not only is adding entities to your document is important, but where you're adding those entities are important, and how many times you're adding those entities are just as important. So an explicit mention is when you put in let's say your exact entity. For instance, if you're optimizing for gyms near me, for instance, so your entity will be gyms, and near me would be another entity. So let's say it's going to be gyms. And so for gyms, you have bodybuilding, that's an associated entity. There are also fitness, that's another entity. So a document or a query can have multiple entities. So you can have multiple entities on a single document, and each mentioned in different places. So an entity, for instance, you can have it in your headline, you can have it in the body text, you can have it in the footer, You're going to even have it in the menu. So the entity appears in different parts of your page and different parts of your message, different parts of your website. So if you just have a single mention of it on your page, that's not enough. I think that's most people that watch my videos already know that. But then there is the question of having an explicit mention. So your entity, for instance, is gym, explicitly mentioning the word gym, or, as compared to mentioning the word fitness center. So you would have explicit mentions with a gym. You also have implicit mentions. That's fitness center, yoga center, for instance, yoga institute, whatever it may be. So those are implicit mentions. It implies, so even this means that it implies the word gym is being used, and it implies the term gym or the entity gym. So usually a document that's well optimized will have both. It will have an explicit mention and it will also have an implicit mention. Then there's also position by time. So not only is where your entity is positioned important, but also how many times is mentioned in the document. So the algorithm we found tracks how often each entity is mentioned in the document, and entities mentioned more frequently are considered central and important to the document. So for instance, if you're trying to optimize for the term gym, you will not just have it in the H1, or you will not just have it in the title, or you will not just have it once in the body. You will have it multiple times. So the most important points where Google is looking at the word gym is the title, the H1, the first paragraph of your text, and the last paragraph of your text. So that's where Google is looking at. So if your entities is in those parts of your page, those are the most important parts. Now you can have it in other parts of your page and there's nothing against that. But we found that adding your entities in these parts of the page are most important. Now, we'll get to schema later on, but for now, we'll just talk about where it should be on the visible page. The ISI implicit is an API. It's true if the entity is mentioned implicitly. So if it's there implicitly, this algorithm is looking at it. So the implicit entities are calculated by the algorithm when certain related entities are mentioned in the document. So let's say you're optimizing for the word gym, but you're not using the word gym for us, or you've just used it in the title. But then you're using terms like fitness center, yoga center, slimming center, bodybuilding center, bodybuilding gym. You're using these types of entities. This algorithm kicks in, it pulls in these entities, and it builds a relationship to find what else do these entities mean. So for instance, again, I've put this instance over here. So it's pulling in these entities saying, all right, so what else do these entities mean? So it then fills in the blank. So it will say, all right, so it also means gym, it also means fitness center, even if it might not be on the page itself, because Google already has that list. And again, you remember I might have said that, Google is checking for these entities, and Google is checking for those entities because Google already has a list of those entities. And Google is checking for how many of those entities are on your page. And if Google can build that picture, Google can understand, all right, so this is what you're trying to optimize for. It fills in the blanks for all the other entities. And so you don't have to mention every entity related, distantly related on your page, though it would be a good thing if you could build a page that has at least all the related entities on it. But if you're not doing that, Google is not bound by just what's on your page because it has a list of its own. And so you can get away with, minimal optimization. But if you're in a highly competitive industry, it's not going to work as well, because then the more well optimized your content is, the more entities it has, it improves the odds of ranking because Google is checking for all of those entities. And then Google uses what's called a confidence score. Now, it's a probabilistic score describing how certain the annotator is. This exact range in the document or query refers to the entity. This means that Google is seeking the most important entities in a document. So the goal for the algorithm is when it gets on your page, it's trying to identify what is the most important part of this page. That's what it's trying to do. And to figure that out, it's looking at your title, it's looking at your H1, it's looking at your footer, it's even looking at your menu. And once it finds that so-called main entity based on probability, and probability is mainly like how many times that entity is repeated on your page, and also in the context of your website. Once it finds that, it knows this is the main entity of the document. And so everything from then on out is based on what Google identifies as the main entity, which is why you have to make sure that Google finds the right entity on your page for it to rank for the right stuff. And that's what a lot of people, interestingly, even seasoned SEOs are getting wrong. And that's where the confidence score comes in. So the higher, if you put your entity in all the right places, Google has a higher confidence score for that entity for your page, which means that you'll rank better for that entity and all its related entities. So Salient term set is a collection of terms, unigrams and bigrams with associated weights that can describe something, the salient terms. Now, salient terms, something I've discussed in previous videos many times. And you can pull up a whole list of salient terms, your tools, your find online free, put in a term, it gives you a list of unigrams and bigrams. How much of that needs to be used on your website is still controversial. I would not go out of my way to optimize for this, even though there is a dedicated API that looks at this type of stuff. More importantly, I'll just make sure that once my document is ready, it just has bigrams and unigrams in it, which most probably it would if it's well written. And then there are other APIs like doc data. So doc data contains additional salient term level data, and then you've got silent term, that is salient term. The salient term is a list of terms that are good descriptors sorted in decreasing order or weight. Then you've got the version. So version is the salient terms used to create the salient term set. And so these APIs are working as, let's say, a team to figure out what's on your page. And so you don't necessarily need to have everything on your page, but you need to have as much as you can. So that's the goal. Related words is also something very controversial in the SEO community, but apparently Google has an API for that. So it's a list of entities that are latent given this entity. For example, if you've got Lionel Messi, and football fans will know who he is, the latent entity will be FC Barcelona. And usually what that means is Google is making that connection. So if you use the word Lionel Messi, Google automatically associates that with FC Barcelona. But then there's a nuance to this. They can be another person named Lionel Messi. And so if it's this other person, Google then needs to build that association with their entity, because if that association is not built with their entity, Google will not be able to tell the difference between whether you're talking about Lionel Messi, the footballer, or Lionel Messi, the author, or Lionel Messi, the SEO guy. So again, Google is not just looking at the term Lionel Messi to build that latent entity, but Google also looking at its relationship with other entities on your page. So again, latent entities with associated metadata include source of the relationship. So as I said, it's going to be a relationship that Google builds to know for sure that this is the entity that you're mentioning. So in simpler terms, these are words related to the main subject of the document. And so if you're talking about Lionel Messi, let's say, who is an SEO guy, who's not a footballer, you need to be aware of that there is a Lionel Messi who's very famous, and he is an he is a footballer. Then you make that distinction on your page to ensure that this is Lionel Messi, the SEO guy, and then you have links to associated websites where Lionel Messi, the SEO guy, is talked about. So it can be a news piece, it can be an author bio, it can be books that they've published. That will help Google build that entity and its latent entity, for instance. This will help Google built that latent entity that's needed for Lionel Messi, the SEO guy, to rank when someone searches for Lionel Messi and they're searching it in terms of SEO. For instance, someone searches for, I want to optimize my website. For instance, someone searches for SEO guy in Spain, Lionel Messi, the SEO guy will pop up. So here's the kicker. So Google already has a list of related terms and entities for every document. It's just checking to make sure that your document has it. So how can you use this to rank? Based on what we've learned, there are a few things we would need to do. You want to include related entities on your page. For instance, if your page is about dog food, you might want to mention protein, nutrition. There are various tools that can help you do this. There are free tools that you can use online. I've kind of built my own tool that pulls in entities. You can also use Surfer SEO that pulls in entities. It's really up to you how you want to do this. It's very easy to find a list of entities. The next important thing is when you're optimizing your on-page is to make sure that your entities are frequently mentioned. So once you have covered all the entities or the full breadth of entities that are highly related to that page, you then need to increase the number of times they appear. Usually it's 3 to 5 times. That will be the average if someone asked me. But in some cases, you might want to do more. Now, the nuance here is, let's say your main entity, once you've identified as gym, you don't want to use the term slimming center 28 times and the entity gym 3 times. So you need to make sure that the proportions are right. The next thing Google is doing is using what's called entity scoring. And if you think that you can just add a bunch of entities, make sure there are enough times, and you will rank, that's not really the case. There's a lot more refinement that needs to be done if you want to get the highest rankings. And this is why when we're doing SEO, a lot of our on-page is multi-step. So we would get into a page where we optimize it. Then we look at how it's performing over the next 4 weeks. And based on that, we will re-optimize it. We will improve it. Because this varies a little bit from one industry to the other. It also depends a lot on competition. The more times you go in and revise it and improve it, the higher your odds are of improving and ranking higher. And so it's not just a single step, throw it into Surfer SEO, optimize, publish. That's not how it works. It's also a lot of it is monitoring, making sure that the pages that you optimize are ranking well. And if they stop ranking well, you need to get in and, just improve it. So, but also a big part of this is what plays a role is Google's scoring system. And Google keeps changing the scoring system, which is why, again, you need to go in and improve those pages. So there are a few APIs that Google is using. It's using the IDF, the original term. It's using the label. Can be 2 things depending on where the message is. Then you've got original terms are different ways to be found. This normalized terms and signals. So essentially what this means is it's looking at the originality of your content. So how is your content different from everything else that's already out there? So it's looking at what original terms you're using, how is it different, and how is it labeled. Then it's using salience. So we talked about salience. So salience is the importance of the term as a descriptor. I have a separate video about salience. You can go ahead and watch that. It goes into great detail about the salience score, adding salience. Then there's a signal term. The signal term contains extra signal specific. You've got body, anchors, clicks, data in this term. You've got virtual TF is the accumulated corrected term frequency for all signals. Then you've got weight is the importance of the term as a descriptor, so 0 to 100. So depending on how well that descriptor is placed within your text, the higher it will score, because the more weight it would have. So what does all of this technical stuff mean? So here we see a mention of IDF, which means inverse document frequency. This shows that Google evaluates original content by identifying entities or topics that are rarely mentioned elsewhere. If an entity is uncommon across a large body of text, this is likely original content. Now, let me explain this to you with an example. I had a client that they were an affiliate website. They had recently come to me and they asked me to optimize their site, help them rank better because they were smacked down by a few algorithm updates. And so after we went ahead and the website started to improve, I identified that there were some pages, well, in fact, there were a lot of pages that were not doing so well. So we couldn't break into the top 10 of SERPs for the main keyword. So what I did was we did an inverse document frequency audit. And we looked at how our page is exactly the same as all the other pages that are ranking. And we found that our page had just about everything that all the other pages had. So Google theoretically has no reason to rank us. Now, we could brute force our way through it. There are ways to do it, but it will be expensive, and we're just an update away from being knocked down again. And the page was about chargers. So it was about wireless charging and wireless charging capabilities. And they had a whole list of wireless chargers on the page. Like obviously, they're affiliate marketers. So after a good look and research, I figured, you know what this page does not have, and all the other pages also don't have, is charging speed. So none of these reviews talk about how fast they charge the phone or the smartphone. So we went ahead and we put in, I think, like 20, 30 words for each description, and just talked about, like, this charger charged the iPhone 13 from 0 to 50 in 29 minutes. All right. This charged the Galaxy S23 in 40 minutes. So we just went ahead and just added this to the descriptions because they were a list. So it was a listicle type article. And we jumped in a matter of weeks from being number 15 for wireless chargers to number 4. And all we did was we changed this. So this is why, you always need to do an audit of your content. And the inverse document frequency audit is something we do. This is something we learned from the algorithm itself, but it's also something we found out through testing. It's worth doing because it will help you rank. So the next we have the salience, which measures how important an entity is. So Google constantly assesses which entity is the most important in a document. So this changes a lot. But if you're going in and you're re-optimizing your content, just make sure that the salience score is good, regardless of what changes you make. Now, the salience score is not the end-all be-all, but that's kind of a measurement of, how your most important entity appears to Google. So just make sure that that's the case. If you want a deep dive into salience and salience scores, there's a separate video. I think I did it a few months back. You can check that out. How does this translate to your on-page optimization? So focus on creating original content with entities your competitors aren't using. Original content gets rewarded. Yes. And this does not mean that you can't use AI. You can use the AI and you can still create original content. But it's down to how you do it. And as I said, I gave you that example. Use that as a way to look at how you can differentiate your content and add more value to it compared to all of your competitors. So Google looks for the most important terms on a page, which is your salience. So make sure the main focus of your article is clear. And then you want to add categories. So beyond individual entities, consider which categories your content fits into. Use relevant entities that competitors might not be including. The other one is optimization tips. So many tools only suggest the same words your competitors are using. Surfer SEO, by the way, does the same thing, which can make your content a weaker version for top results. You don't just want to copy the current rankings. You want to do something better. So aim to match the top results, but go beyond it by using entities your competitors might miss. So again, charging speed, charging time, in relation to the types of phones that are being charged. So just think about this. I always try to include highly related entities to stand out and back it up with unique, factual, and quantifiable data. So I've got an example here. I'm not going to go through an example. I already gave you guys an example, but if you want, you can pause the video and read for the example. Finally, what you want to do is make sure that if you have a page, if you're creating a page, you have a checklist, and you can pause the video, take notes, make a checklist based on this, and make sure you're checking all the boxes when you're optimizing your page. And if you've checked all the boxes, I would say your page will be more optimized than 95% of the pages out there. And then, depending on how Google looks at it and how it appears in Search Console, you can then make minor tweaks to it. If it's not ranking as well, or if it's stuck someplace, you can make minor tweaks to it and just make sure that you're making notes of what changes you're making, whether it's adding more entities, whether it's removing entities, whether it's adding higher number of entities. Just make sure that you're keeping track of it. All right, guys, so I hope you got a lot of value from the video. Like and subscribe as always. Leave a comment below if you have a question, and I will see you guys in the next video.